Well, over the past 24 hours, the Championship managerial merry-go-round has cranked up for the summer. We had our first change in the hot seat with Wayne Rooney joining Plymouth last week. Well, now we've got two in 24 hours. We start with the earliest appointment of the two, as Norwich City announced the appointment of Johannes Thorup as their new first-team head coach. He was the former man of Nordsjaelland who had led the side to two very strong finishes in 2 years after working his way up at the club. And he replaces David Wagner, who led Norwich to a very creditable 6th place and a playoff semi-final. But away form came back to haunt them late on again. And now, after a change of style and a change of director of football, it looks like we're going to be getting a change of approach from the new manager as well. But very quickly, before we go on to all of that stuff about the old man and the new replacement, let me tell you a few quick words about our partners today and what their special offer can do to help you. For this video, we're proudly partnered with HelloFresh. HelloFresh are on a mission to make your meal times easier with pre-portioned ingredients, quick and easy recipe cards, and plenty of treats we can get on board with too. Get 60% off your first box plus free dessert for life by clicking a link at the top of the description. Sounds good, doesn't it? I've tried it before, I'm a big fan of the brand and have helped with my weight loss this year too. There's healthy options available, so why not grab your discount and give HelloFresh a go from the description below. So we're going to talk about the new man in a minute and what we can expect. I do like the Danish league, I've watched a little of it, so I will talk a little bit about the new man. But first, I want to have a look back at the season of David Wagner because it's very much been a man that's divided opinion. We've done a few polls in recent weeks during and after the playoffs and seen what people thought of him. But overall, I think it should be reflected purely from a footballing point of view. He did a good job. He got the team into the top 6, which pre-season would have probably been the aim. Let's be fair, Norwich came down and had a very disappointing season last year. They were in a bad place. They needed some turning around, and David Wagner achieved that. Now, I will say as well, Norwich City started last season on fire. At 4-4 away at Southampton, the 4-0 thumping at Huddersfield, which ironically is where it went a little bit wrong because Josh Sargent picked up a big long-term injury that day. And then on deadline day, before their next match away at Rotherham United at the start of September, 2 of his star and most mobile defenders were sold from the club. And I actually feel that week ended up defining David Wagner's season and his sort of view from the fans because they started Norwich, and it was a fair few Norwich fans that said this. They actually started the season brilliantly. They played really good football those first few games. They were exciting to watch. But he had to change his style because after that injury to Sargent and those 2 key defenders were sold, he was left with a cheap and largely immobile backline by Championship standards, and he was left without a goal threat so much. So after defeats away at Rotherham and Plymouth very heavily, if you remember back in September, David Wagner had to change the style a bit, and despite a terrible run of form throughout October and early November, despite the fact that when they went into their FA Cup 3rd round tie at home to Bristol Rovers in January, he was wanted out of the club by most of the fans. There was a protest against him. Not sure if that's part of the protest or not. But after that, we saw a real turnaround in form, particularly home form, when Norwich City became remarkable. They picked up 28 out of 30 points in the next 10 games at home before a couple of stuttering draws at the end of the season. But they did make the playoffs despite the fact that from David Wagner's point of view, he had 2 starting defenders sold on the final days of the August window and had his star starting striker in Josh Sargent and his star starting wide man in Jonathan Rowe both injured for the best part of half a season. Now, from a neutral point of view, you can completely understand looking at it why he's had to adapt his style there. One of the things that was sort of pointed at him when he was leaving the club or when fans wanted him out towards the end of the season was, yeah, but our style of play is not good enough. We're playing every game like we're playing Barcelona and we're playing on the counter-attack. We're playing behind the ball. But you've got to protect your defence a little bit. And with the players that he had available, with the greatest of respect, Shane Duffy at his age, and we'll take aside the stuff that's happened off the pitch, but on it, he's not got the mobility of Omobamidele, who was sold off to Nottingham Forest. There's not the mobility of Max Aarons in that defence that had been there previous season. So he did have to change things a little. Add to that, obviously the second half of the year, Giannoulis was out injured a long time. There was a huge amount of pace and mobility that went out of that back line. And if he'd played to outscore the opposition, which if you remember, we'll get to in a minute, but his Huddersfield team did years before, then there would have been probably carnage like we saw away at Plymouth. Now, one of the things I do want to take away is this media labelling of David Wagner, because if you go back to his Huddersfield side that got promoted from the playoffs, they averaged nearly 59% of the ball, averaged over 62% of it at home, and were goals galore for fun. Now, he couldn't do that with this Norwich team, given what he had available defensively and in terms of injuries offensively. So I completely understand why he adapted the style. But let's also be fair here. I can understand why the fans found it difficult. We mentioned it going into the playoffs. Norwich City had the 6th worst away record in the division this year, which it isn't good enough, unfortunately, even for a top 6 team. And while their home record was remarkable the second half of the season, maybe his adaptations didn't find a way on the road, and no game probably proved that more than the semi-final of the playoffs, where away at Leeds they did struggle in a shape and maybe didn't have that plan B at 1-0 down. But then Huddersfield back then didn't have a plan B, to be fair. It's just that plan A worked more often than not. So it's definitely not a full-fledged, why on earth were fans frustrated with Wagner? I get it. We've had those spells before at Luton, even when we were doing well with other managers. So I understand it. But overall, I think we have to reflect that David Wagner did a good job. He got beaten by one of the relegated Premier League sides in the playoffs, having got into that top 6, which, when you look at the start of the season, would have probably been considered a very decent effort. It's just the way it's been done and some of the circumstances which just have ended up not working out for either. And we've got to bear in mind as well here, there is a bigger story to this than David Wagner, which is he was Stuart Webber's man, and Stuart Webber has become increasingly unpopular at Norwich in the last few years, in that technical director of football role, whatever you want to call it. But coming in this season, with a new director of football, with a new person behind the scenes, you can understand why you wanted that new style of coaching to take the club to the next level. So I can actually see the parting of the ways being a good thing for both, because I think David Wagner, under the new sporting director, Ben Napper, I'm not sure will have been quite a marriage made in heaven. And to get their man in, to go and back him, then they can go confidently and say, this is our man, this is our project, this is our print on a team. And no one can have any excuses if it goes wrong. So I can understand this from both sides' point of view, but I don't think the year has harmed David Wagner, if I'm being honest with you. Let's move on to the new man, though, because this is also an exciting time. Because Johannes Thorup is the new head coach at Norwich City on a 3-year deal, having joined from Nordsjaelland at the end of the Danish Superliga season. He has, over his time in Denmark, averaged over 50% win rate, slightly higher than Norwich City with David Wagner, who picked up 41% over his year and a half, but obviously in slightly different circumstances in a different league. However, he did lead Nordsjælland's second place last season. He led them into that battle for the European places this year as well. And he's done a solid job having come through the ranks, starting at Aalborg, but then going to the youth side at Nordsjælland and continuing that progression of developing young players from the youth team and then giving them opportunities once he reached senior level, having been the assistant as well. So one of the questions we normally ask at this point, if it's a brand new head coach, is have they got any experience in man management, in dealing with players? Because that's where it's sort of sink or swim time for people that have been a good number 2 or a good coach prior. I always mention the examples with Nathan and Graham Jones at Luton. However, in this instance, he has led the team. He's got that 2 years of experience under his belt. And it kind of makes it a little bit more comforting for Norwich fans, knowing that there's that bit of experience there, having managed games in Europe as well, which will make a big difference too. He's obviously a highly rated coach. He's been linked with a few jobs in the Championship in the last year or so. And to get him down on a 3-year deal, it's a big sign of commitment for both. And they've also given him assistant head coach Glenn Riddersholm, who came in for Norrköping, that in the Swedish top tier. So a lot of experience from Scandinavia, a lot of coaching quality, but will they be able to live up to it? Now, one of the big things we've got to talk about here is not just whether he can replicate a top 6 finish or get Norwich up and in and around that chase. It's whether or not he can adapt the style of play to what Norwich want with the players that are available, because Norwich City fans want more entertainment. They want to be set up as a front-footed team at times, something that hadn't always happened in the spell under David Wagner. So I will issue a couple of words of caution just on that front, because in the last 2 seasons of the top teams, Nordsjælland have had the best or joint best defensive record. Last season, when they finished second to Copenhagen, equal defensive record, far inferior attacking record. Last season, of the top four which Nordsjaelland were in the Danish Superliga, they were the lowest scorers, joint lowest. So there is a suggestion that maybe it's not going to be an instant turnaround. But clearly, Ben Napper is a man who feels this is the right appointment. Having rejected several other candidates, he will have had a long shortlist. Norwich is an appealing job for many. A side competing at the top of the Championship is a great route to Premier League football. You can take a side there yourself. But one of the things that you see constantly mentioned through the statement is aligning with our vision, in line with our project. It is very clear that they have discussed how they're going to build things from a recruitment point of view, an area that's been criticised at Norwich for a number of years under Stuart Webber previously, and about how they're going to progress the club on the pitch in terms of a style of play. But I do wonder alongside that what the expectations are from a playing point of view. Because if you're going to have a large overhaul of players, which there will have to be at Norwich to adapt to his style next season and adapt to the style that they want to play, certainly defensively there's going to need to be additions because they can't play front-footed football with a back line as immobile as that. And Shane Duffy's had his problems off the pitch as we saw towards the end of the year too. But if he's going to do that, it's then going to take time to develop results on the pitch. And is there going to be patience? We so often see in the Championship that the answer is no. And actually, if we look at these two manager specials we're doing today, there's a lot of similarities. David Wagner and Liam Rossini have both done an excellent job. And Rossini, ironically, was one of the early favourites for Norwich. But it's the style of play that's lost them the job, rather than the performance in terms of results and points per game. The key thing that seems to stand out here, though, is the fact that he likes to develop talent and give it chance. Now, that is partly a brilliant bit of coaching and some of his work in the past, but it is also a requirement at the club he was at. And it'll be interesting to see if that stays when things perhaps go wrong or if they have a poor run at Norwich City, which most sides in the Championship do at some point in the year. But Norwich City should be looking for that to an extent because they've got one of the best academies in the country. They've produced one of the highest rates of players that have then come through and played senior professional football across the EFL and Premier League in recent years. So why would they not try and take advantage of that, both to generate income for the club and to bring through players that can compete for them? It does seem like a match made in heaven. Now, we've got to talk about on the pitch as well, because in addition to it being a very decent appointment on paper, aligned with their vision, and you've got to say he spoke very well in his first press conference as well, his Nordsjaelland side, while maybe not the highest scorers, were very fluent to watch. You could tell that it was his team immediately, and you could see the slight change in style when he took over 2 years ago. Definitely brings through a lot of young players. We've seen some move on for massive money recently that he would have been involved in the development of. Thorup being a key example, who went up to Benfica and then back on loan to Nordsjaelland. He's definitely a man, though, that likes to play a possession-based game. And again, that is the one thing that both of these appointments in the last day have in common at both Norwich City and Hull. The questions we normally ask at this point, though, are, is it the right appointment for Norwich City on the pitch? And will he see out his contract? Now, the second question, we almost certainly have to say no, because the average lifespan of a Championship manager is less than a year. If you start poorly, you're normally sacked. If you do well, as we're seeing at the moment, you can be poached by anyone from Bayern Munich all the way to sort of Brighton, Chelsea, Manchester United, and whoever else might need a manager in the next few weeks. It seems to be going nuts. On the first point, though, about Norwich City, I'm actually a little bit torn on this because I think letting David Wagner go actually harms their chances of getting in the top 6 next year, in terms of if David Wagner had still been there, especially given what's going on at some of the other clubs, I would have said, do you know what? I would happily hang my hat on Norwich being in the top 6 this year. Now I can't say it with certainty because there's always an element of the unknown. We've got a manager who's never been in England before. The Championship is a ferocious league to come into. We've seen someone like John Dale Thomason who came in and did really well there, but perhaps wasn't sold correctly what was going to be happening off the pitch and then became frustrated and disillusioned. We've seen other examples where it's just gone horribly wrong. We look at Joe Edwards at Millwall during last season, where they tried to change their style completely too quickly and didn't have the players there to do that. And that's why I say it's so important he gets the backing to get his type of players in during the window. But we have also seen examples such as Company coming from Anderlecht to Burnley. Yes, he knew English football before. Yes, they had a big budget in the league. But where he changed the style and he went and flew through the division. So there is always an element of the unknown here. We have no idea what we're going to get. The Norwich City fans probably have no idea what they're going to get. But that's part of the charm, isn't it? For me, though, I do think whilst their top six chances are harmed, I think the importance of having unity between fans, the team off the pitch, the recruitment team, the sporting director, in this case, Ben Napper as well, and the management and staffing team is so, so important. And that clearly wasn't there with David Wagner. For whatever reason, it just didn't stick. The fans to the manager to the people behind the scenes. There was fractures along the way. And while all of it sort of cobbled together and worked okay towards the end, it was never going to be a long-term match made in heaven, regardless. So I feel that this is the right move for the football club, despite the fact I feel it may slightly harm their top six chances this year. But then you never know. The year after and the year after, the club could be in a much stronger position. So I'm going to say it possibly is the right manager decision for Norwich City. He's someone that's not particularly known to English football, but is exciting, does play progressive football, and is that sort of modern generation and era of head coach that we expect. However, I do feel that it's going to reduce the chances slightly of Norwich City making a top six this year. I don't think it's impossible by any stretch, because there's a lot of other teams either in trouble or shooting themselves in the foot. And we've lost some very strong sides from the Championship this season too, with, I guess you could perhaps say, even me respectfully as a Luton fan, maybe not as strong a set of teams coming down, particularly given Sheffield United are set to have a points deduction and Burnley have lost their manager to Bayern Munich, which I don't think anyone saw coming a few weeks ago. But that's my overall reaction to the Norwich City appointment. I guess I'm a little on the fence on this one compared to normal. I do think it's a good appointment for the long term of the club and just to align the club again. And I know it was mentioned a lot in a statement, but it is important that everyone's unified and on board. Most successful football clubs have that. However, for instant results, David Wagner probably was the man to get them. But you never know. These things can work out both horrifically and brilliantly. The charm of football, the beauty of the Championship, is that we will find out from August onwards. It doesn't really matter what I think, though, does it? Let me know, Norwich fans. What do you think in the comments below? You must be excited to have a young coach that's been linked with a lot of Championship jobs. But do you think it's more about the longer term project now rather than an instant success again next season? Are you hoping for both? Are you expecting both? What do you expect, I guess, is the thing to ask, because I know you're going to want to play front-footed football, but you know there's also going to need to be backing for that. Do you think he'll get it? Do you think this is going to work out? And do you think Ben Napper and Johannes Thorup is the duo you need behind the scenes and in the dugout to make things work? If you enjoyed this little look at the Norwich City manager change, please do put a thumbs up on it. The whole City one will be following in literally a couple of hours, so you can find that up in the eye above soon. The Plymouth one is already there. Big reaction to Wayne Rooney going to Plymouth Argyle. Come and check it out up in the eye above. We, of course, once the season starts again, we'll be doing our Matchday Championship predictions every single round. You can come and get involved with those, have a bit of fun with us too. For now, though, if you want to make sure you don't miss any of it, subscribe and turn that notification bell on. And thank you very much for watching. I hope you're enjoying the summer break. We'll see you again in a couple of hours as we discuss Hull City and their appointment of Tim Walter.